Yo, what is up guys, it's Pedro here, and in today's video I'll be talking about the Jaguars listening to trade calls for wide receiver Brian Thomas and if the Washington Commanders could make a move to reunite college teammates Jaden Daniels and Brian Thomas Jr. If you guys are new, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button and that notification bell as well. This video is just basically me talking about the possibility of it happening. Could Brian Thomas Jr. go to the Washington Commanders? So not clickbait or anything, just talking about the possibility of the trade, what it would take, if I would do it, if I think it's realistic, and a bunch more. So let's talk about this. So Diana Rossini, who does have a lot of NFL sources, maybe Commanders fans don't love her, but she does have some good sources. She says Jaguars are listening to trade calls for Brian Thomas Jr., which to me is crazy, and that should I would say concern people a little bit if the Jaguars are trying to trade a guy that just had an outstanding rookie year. They're trying to trade him already in his second year. Maybe it's not a scheme fit, or maybe something else is going on. Maybe Brian Thomas wants out, but something weird is going on if they're listening to trade calls for him. Then, because normally, listening is different than, going out of your way and trying to shop someone. But still, like with a player like Brian Thomas, usually you're not even listening. If someone calls, you hang up the phone. So for me, it's definitely something interesting there, with Brian Thomas. But their offensive coordinator, we'll talk about in a little bit, but every stop he's been with the receivers, after he leaves, the receiver ends up having a great next year with, Jackson Smith and Jibba. And then also we had, I'm trying to think who else. Roma Dunze, who's had a really good second year. But let's go over some of Brian Thomas's stats, because he's been great so far, at least in his first year. Second year's been a little bit worse, obviously, but he's a guy, he's 23 years old. 23 years old, was born October 8th, 2002, and was with Jaden Daniels at LSU, 209 pounds, 6'3". So he's got a good frame, different than what we have in Washington with Terry, Debo as well. So, even though it's been a disappointing year, no doubt disappointing year for Brian Thomas Jr., he has 365 yards and a touchdown in 7 games. Yes, that's not good, but, it's still not awful. And his first year in 17 games, had 87 catch, 133 yards, almost 1,300 yards, 15 yards a catch, 10 touchdowns. And obviously, the biggest thing is him and Jaden are boys, and they have, not only did they play together in college, but, that is really what I'm saying. They have a really good connection, and that will help out Jaden a lot, and that could, you could get more out of Brian Thomas than maybe you're getting in Jacksonville, because of how well they played at LSU and how good of a connection they have. So I think it's would be a good move in my opinion. It depends on how much you're gonna have to give up for him. I see people saying a second and a third. Guys, it's gonna cost minimum of first, in my opinion, unless there's something crazy wrong. The guy had 1,300 yards in his rookie year. Still, it hasn't been amazing, but it's not awful in his second year, and he's on a rookie contract. So you have 2 more years of cheap play, and then if you decide to pick up the last year, still below market value play. So it's gonna cost the first. I'm doing the math right here. Just kind of trying to see what he's on pace for right now. So he's averaging 52 yards a game. If you multiply that by 17, he's on pace for like 900 yards. Obviously not good. 900 yards, like 2-ish touchdowns. I think he'll probably put it together a little bit more later on in the season, but I think Brian Thomas, making a move for him wouldn't be a bad idea. But obviously, you're giving up your picks, and that's not something you want to do, especially for older guys. But in this case, you're going for a younger guy that you would gladly, in my opinion, I would take Brian Thomas in the first round. I kind of wanted the Commanders to trade back into the first round in the 2024 draft to try and get Brian Thomas, and the fact that the Jaguars are shopping him makes it very enticing for me, obviously I'm not making the decision, but it would be very enticing if I was Adam Peters to make this move. And I'm sure if Jaden Daniels is seeing this anywhere, not this video, but the Brian Thomas rumors, he's going to be, maybe going to Adam Peters and saying, hey, go get my boy. So for me, I think it would be a good move. I know there's going to be people heavily against it. There's going to be people, really happy about the possibility of it. I'm, in the middle. I don't think you should give up, all your assets, all your capital, but I also think that, he is a guy that could be, your future receiver for the next, 5-10 years. And, you pair him with Jaden, you make Jaden happy and, give him another reason not to leave this team in a few years. I'm not saying he would, but, just another reason not to. And you really are set on offense if you get someone like Brian Thomas. I mean, the offensive line is good. I think it's good. You could maybe make some minor adjustments, but I think the offensive line overall is good. And then, you have Brian Thomas, Terry, and then Jalen Lade and Luke McCaffrey. Maybe you still have Debo, but probably not. And then you're going to have, you still have decent running backs with Bill Krosky, Merritt, and, other guys in that room. Your tight end, you might have to make some adjustments there, but I don't know what you would have to give up in a trade. The Jaguars still want to win, so maybe you could, not that this matters at all, but you could throw in Deebo Samuel in the trade. Again, I'm not saying that even remotely makes it even, but it would be worth it, to them maybe because they want to win this year. They get a guy like Deebo Samuel that can help them win this year. You throw in like a first round pick, maybe not this year, but next year, something along those lines. It's really hard to gauge the value with someone like Brian Thomas Jr. because he was a first round pick 2 years ago, had an outstanding year, and this year hasn't been the best. So, which year do you really look at, and, do you it's just really hard to gauge the value. But I would, whatever, to a reasonable degree, whatever the price is, I would definitely consider it for the Washington Commanders. Real quick, a word from today's sponsor. And a huge shout out to Sleeper for sponsoring today's video. There are a lot of college football games on today for you to make picks to win real money. There's a bunch of NFL games on tomorrow. There's NBA, there's World Series, there's NHL, and you can, make picks on Sleeper. You can also just check all the sports news that you want on Sleeper, which is really cool as well. They got fantasy leagues, so make sure you guys check out Sleeper. Use promo code Pedro and get a 100% match up to $100. Link in the description. There also is a free $20 entry you can use as well. Again, check out Sleeper. Link in the description. All right, so now, again, huge shout out to Sleeper, but let's talk a little bit more about this move, maybe on the other side, of the side that doesn't want to make the move. So, one, you don't have a lot of, draft capital, so trading a first and maybe a player or some other picks might not be the smartest move. And two, you could, maybe Adam Peters, this receiving class doesn't seem like there's a lot of elite guys like there is in the next class with, Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams from Alabama, Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. But, there are a lot of good guys in this class, for Adam Peters to potentially, make a move on them. And, they're not going to be top 5 guys in my opinion, but they're going to be right where the Commanders are picking, which I don't know exactly. Who knows where this season goes, but probably anywhere from 9 to 15. There's going to be a good, there's going to be some good receivers available there for the Commanders to, potentially draft. So that's part, of the draft cap, or that's part of the reason why maybe the Commanders shouldn't make that move. Also, again, they don't have a lot of draft capital, so you're really losing all of that. Also, their defense is the problem. It's not the offense. So you trade away a first-round pick, you trade away, maybe a defensive player, and how are you going to get this defense better? Yeah, there's definitely ways. Bring in an elite defensive coordinator. Bring out the Brinks truck and pay that defensive coordinator almost like a head coach. And, because we saw what the Lions did, and we saw what, the Lions did against the Bucks with, Nick Whiteside out there, a bunch of guys that were, UDFAs or on the practice squad. We're balling out. We're strapping up Ibuka and, some of the other receivers out there. I mean, sure, they made some plays and Baker wasn't great, but that defense balled out. And they did it with not a lot of great personnel. So that's something they could do to. They also, free agency, you don't want to build through that, but you can find some good young players there and build a little bit through there with the guys you already have on the defense. Maybe Jordan McGee takes a step up and you don't really need to add another linebacker. Maybe Mikey Sainristil with a new coordinator turns it around. But I do see that side of it too. The defense is bad, and I would prefer adding help on the defense. Like if we're in the draft, at least I'd rather go edge than receiver, but that's besides the point. We're talking about we're talking about the negative effects of this trade if the Commanders made it, and that would definitely be, the defense would take a hit in terms of, them being able to, make some moves after. And, I definitely see that. And then you're going to have to pay him in a few years. But again, if you're going to have to pay him, that's a good problem to have. I definitely wouldn't mind it. You see when these stud receivers get traded, usually it works out for the team that ends up making the trade, i.e. A.J. Brown with, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, a bunch of things, different things to consider, but you're making your franchise quarterback happy. You're adding a potential elite receiver that's 23 years old, played college football with Jaden Daniels. So for me, it makes a lot of sense. I would be willing to give up a lot of draft capital for it. And, maybe you can lessen that draft capital a little bit by, adding some players. But that's my thoughts on the whole situation. But that's it for today's video. Hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you guys are new. Peace.